You are listening to Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. I'm your host, Josh Lucas, and at Method, our vision is to connect technology with humanity for a simpler digital future. Join us as we speak with leading experts to discuss industry trends, best practices, and emerging technology that can help you and your organization craft better digital products and experiences. Hello and welcome to Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. I'm Josh Lucas, and today I'm joined by Tim Morey and Evangelos Simoudis. And Tim is the global head of Method, and he brings extensive global leadership experience in design, product management, marketing, and strategy. He's held marketing strategy and product roles in Silicon Valley companies and has a proven track record of bringing award-winning products and services to market for companies across the globe. And also with us today is our expert in the automotive evolution, Evangelos. And Evangelos is an author, a keynote speaker, managing director of Synapse Partners, who invest in early stage startups developing horizontal and vertical enterprise software AI applications. Now, Evangelos has an upcoming book, which actually just at the time of our recording just went out yesterday, correct? So that is available. And that book, which will help anchor much of our discussion here today, is entitled The Flagship Experience: How AI and Software-Defined Vehicles Will Revolutionize the Automotive Customer Experience. And he has also authored two other related books, The Big Data Opportunity in Our Driverless Future and The Transportation Transformation. So be sure to add those to your 2024 reading list. So welcome, Tim and Evangelos.
And congratulations on dropping the book. That's great.
Thank you very much. Most of this year was devoted to that, so I'm glad we made it by the skin of our teeth, as they say.
Just to give a little bit of a level set. So for the folks who are maybe new to the conversation or are unfamiliar with your work, we were excited about this topic and to frame up the discussion that we're going to have, and apologies, I'm going to read one more time and then I'll be putting the paper down. We'll be having more of a dialogue here, but the future of automotive for almost 100 years, car makers have competed on powerful engines and beautiful cars, but no longer. In a world of software-defined vehicles and digital experience, the automotive industry is rapidly changing. Competition in the future will be around the experience of mobility, where the car is one aspect of the overall process. So I want to just jump right in here. Evangelos, I think that description sets us up well, but for folks who are maybe more traditionalists to the automotive world, that's probably a stark departure from what they're used to. People who are used to the newest aesthetic, the newest engine, the more powerful engine. Can you give us a breakdown and give us a brief summary of when you're talking about the flagship experience? What does that mean to you as you've described it in the book?
So when I started thinking about the role of data and AI and mobility, and the journey that started roughly 8 years ago, I could see the beginning of two types of transformations that have since gained steam. The first transformation is in the car itself. So we have changes in the powertrains. We're going from internal combustion engine to new energy vehicles, whether they are hydrogen power or battery electric, this is changes in the power. The second thing is, as you said, the vehicle is becoming more of a software device, software-driven device, as opposed to being hardware and firmware driven device. So this is happening on the vehicle itself. Bigger transformations are happening in our mobility and how we move, under what conditions we move, why we move. These are all changing, and they're changing at different paces in different parts of the world. but they're changing nonetheless. I mean, you hear about concepts such as the 15-minute city. Well, if you have a 15-minute city, now you start to wonder, do I really need to move my car?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you may not need other modalities, but you certainly you may not need to move your car in the same way that you're doing it today. And as I say, it's different for different geographies because this transformation in mobility is exhibited differently in the United States, where we have to drive longer distances. Our cities are what one researcher has called donut-shaped. We live a lot in suburbs and exurbs as opposed to the center of the city.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, that creates different mobility needs compared to, say, Europe or Middle East or Asia, certain parts of Asia. So these two transformations, where the mobility patterns and the vehicles are really fueling the rethinking of what is the vehicle, what goes into the vehicle, and what is important in the vehicle.
And you talk a lot about the role that software is and inevitably will continue to play. And it seems like the way you've described it in the book, from what I was gathering, is that's only going to become a bigger and bigger piece of the puzzle.
Right. And in the book, I give this example that today's vehicles have a lot of software.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, by some measures, in certain vehicles, you may have more software than in an F-16 fighter plane.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a different kind of software than what the software-defined vehicle will have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in software-defined vehicles, for the first time, we're starting to think of integrated software platforms that interact with the vehicle's hardware using APIs, which is a lot of how we're thinking of other modern enterprise systems. And on top of these platforms, we will have a number of services, a number of applications. And it's these really applications and services that drive what I call the flagship experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you could not have, the reason that the book subtitle is How AI and Software-Defined Vehicles Drive Mobility, is because we couldn't have this type of services, both in terms of richness, in terms of a type of interactions they enable, without having these software platforms that the software-defined vehicles will have.
When you're talking about the flagship experience, immediately I think of a very personalized, a very intimate, maybe a little bit strong of a characterization, but a very personal experience, personalized experience, such as I'd equate it to like my phone or my laptop or a gaming experience where I can go in and customize features and functions, and it feels like mine, and I've customized it to kind of interact with me in all the ways I want it. Is this the direction that you see this going, or am I maybe taking too much liberty with that?
No, you have not. I think, first of all, it's just there have been many attempts recently, the last couple of years, to create an analogy between the smartphone and the software-defined vehicle. And at a high level, the analogy holds. But we should not forget that I cannot kill somebody if I throw my phone at them.
Unless you're very strong.
Unless I was very strong, yes. Whereas the vehicle is a heavy thing, that is a piece of machinery that can create a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But my contention is that going forward, whether it is because economics change, whether it is because people do not, because of their changing mobility patterns, They do not buy vehicles as frequently as they were in the past. But there are many reasons. The ability to customize, to personalize the vehicle and the entire experience that provides you will be very important. And in the book, I talk a lot about the difference between customer experience and user experience. And Tim can speak much more eloquently about this than I can, but I wanted the reader to understand that while the user experience is part of the customer experience that I envision and talk about personalizing involves both what happens within the cabin of the vehicle, but also outside the vehicle. Right? It's the idea of having mobility-related experiences. And you brought up good examples of whether it is the personalization that the company provides to its offering, whether it is the personalization that I have in my devices. If you look at companies like Amazon is our shopping partner. It has taken them a number of years to achieve that, but because of the knowledge that they have of our shopping activities, and because of their willingness and ability to respond to that, to utilize that knowledge and respond to our needs, they have been able to become our shopping partners.
Yeah.
If I look at Google, Google is our information partner. Again, it hasn't happened overnight, but they felt that this was a mission, and they kept utilizing the data that they are capturing. Through the flagship experience, one of the points I'm trying to make is that the automaker needs to become the mobility partner of the customer.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that the automaker needs to gain an understanding of the customer to be able to do that personalization. They need to gain an understanding of the customer that they do not have today.
I thought that was an interesting point. And in my previous, in a previous role I had, I worked in, I worked in racing, and so we had partners with Pepsi and a few other, just tons of sponsors everywhere when it comes to that sort of thing. But I remember talking to some of the folks at Pepsi, and they always referenced what they called stomach space, which was, in my mind, I would think of Pepsi competes with Coca-Cola and other companies are like. In Pepsi's mind, they're competing with anybody who's putting anything in your body that goes to the stomach. That's their competitor. Yeah. And so it kind of sounds like you're describing that a little bit as a mobility partner. And I think you reference it. I can't remember if it's in the flagship experience or your other book, where you're talking about we eventually get to a point where it's not just about getting you from point A to point B, but anything that must move plays a role in there.
So for a couple of our corporate customers, we had, because in addition to investing, we also advise organizations on AI and data, and a number of the organizations we advise are from the mobility industry, whether they're governments or corporations. And we had done some work few years ago, and I had come up with this idea of I call it the mobility or transportation wallet. And the idea behind it was in the same way that the credit card company talks about wallet share, right? How much of the wallet share do they have? Because you may have several credit cards, right? You also can use cash or other means of. And I feel that not only automakers, but maybe starting with automakers, they need to have this concept of transportation wallet share, right? So if I'm, in what we were measuring, we had created a number of metrics for this organization. So if I'm measuring on a consumer by consumer basis, anonymized or not, how do they move? And not only how they move themselves, but also how do they avoid moving by having things come to them, right? So if for my weekly grocery shopping, for example, I use something like Instacart, that means that I'm not driving my car to go to the go to the supermarket, right? Or if I walk to the train station, take a train to San Francisco, and then once I arrive in San Francisco, I take a ride-hailing service to my destination. That means that not only that I've used three different modalities to accomplish a task, a mobility task, but that transportation wallet is split between the distance that I travel on foot, the distance that I travel using mobility service, and the distance that I travel using train. That whole distance, if you aggregate, these are distances that I didn't use my car for.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought it was, so the mindset needs to start changing if you're going to think of becoming the mobility partner of a consumer, let's say, or of a business. You really need to start thinking about how this person moves and why he or she doesn't move.
That breadth of thinking, I think, is the really interesting challenge. And tying back to what you were just describing about the user experience of a car versus the customer experience of mobility. So, and I think you framed this nicely in your book in an axis where you're looking at technology innovation on one axis and business model innovation on a second. So I think an awful lot of incumbent car makers don't give themselves permission to be a mobility partner. They're looking at software-defined vehicles and electrification and new energy sources as really a linear move in technology. And I'll give you an example. This week, I went to Los Angeles for a business meeting, and instead of taking an Uber, I rented a car. And at the counter of budget, they said, "Do you want an EV?" And I drive an EV at home, so I said, "Sure." And they gave me a high-end car, EV, beautifully designed, but it really was just a different form of power in the car. There was nothing about where to charge or how this fits in.
Exactly.
It was very different from the Tesla ecosystem that takes a slightly wider view. And so I'm curious, as you look at this sort of pathway, how you think that'll evolve. And my hypothesis is that a lot of incumbent car makers feel most comfortable simply moving up the technology innovation line. They'll probably be a lot less comfortable, or it'll be a much bigger culture leap and sort of change to go from that to also thinking about a broader mobility ecosystem and thinking about share of mobility wallet and what it means to be a mobility partner to a traveler.
There's no question about it. I think not only automakers, but in other industries that we have worked with, they always find the transformation along the technology axis to be the easiest for them to adopt. And I think this is because they feel that transformation can be accomplished faster with the least damage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've seen some of these transformations even along just the technology axis in the automotive industry, and we see them that if they're not accompanied by organizational transformation and cultural transformation, they typically fail.
Yep.
Okay, they see they have an inflection point for some period, and then they fail. In order for this to work properly, and I've read Isaacson's book on Elon Musk, and I think he's absolutely right in not only saying we need to be thinking both from a product perspective, but we really need to be bringing the other competencies, marketing and sales and regulatory compliance into that equation if we're going to think about this customer experience, first of all, and then how we're going to reflect that customer experience to the customers. So I think that automakers that want to undertake that and really become mobility partners, they have a tough road to hoe, but there are no shortcuts. And I mean, I do not know how many of them will succeed. My point is that the ones that don't bite the bullet, so to speak, and take that more radical path, I think we'll have problems. We'll have problems in the future. I'll mention actually a very recent example. Volkswagen comes out recently and says, we are no longer competitive. It's a pretty big statement,
yes,
from one of the largest automakers in the world.
Yeah.
Now, this is one brand in a stable of several brands.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Volkswagen Group has Porsche and Audi and Skoda and Seat, right? But from that group, Volkswagen is the largest, right? And for them to come and say, we are not competitive, I mean, to me, that speaks volumes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think what they will, they may think that, okay, well, we will shrink and see what comes out, and that may not require a lot of transformation, but that will cause them other troubles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see an easy way. I mean, I think they need to do something more radical, whether it is different practices or transforming along more than the technology dimension.
I think that ties into another question that I wanted both of your opinions on here, but which is, as we're talking about the development and where the automakers lean and their efforts towards software becoming more and more of a factor in this as the cars continue to evolve. What are your thoughts on, is that the automaker that takes that on solely? Do they own that? Because that's not traditionally ever been a role, aside from maybe some of the newer, primarily EV companies. Or do they lean on partnerships? Do they outsource that side of the experience? Where do you see that playing out?
Yeah, so it reminds me of the mobile phone industry. When iPhone came out, and then when Google purchased and then scaled Android, and they were faced with a choice of, do we go with these, do we become partners to these industry standard tools, which is what they did, or do we continue with our own either operating systems or handsets, and in that moment you give up an awful lot of the ownership of a customer experience.
Right.
And so I think it is a pretty existential question. Now, for the incumbent automakers, I think partnering is an attractive option because, you get ready-made access to expertise. But with that choice comes the challenge that you're now no longer fully in control of the overall experience that you're offering. And I think tying back to Evangelos, what you're just discussing, I think some car makers will choose to become a component in an overall experience that's mediated by somebody else. Mm-hmm. Who that somebody else will be is a pretty interesting question. I think others will strive to own a broader piece of the mobility experience, which means innovating not just on the technology, but also on the business model and what you are, what you mean to a traveler. And it's not just the in-car experience. It becomes, how that person navigates the world and it's mapping, it's how that ties into transportation hubs in the cities or the regions that you're in. And I think that's a much more ambitious project, but obviously the prize that comes with that is also a lot bigger.
I think what we have seen over the past 4 years is that we've seen certain automakers, maybe trying to emulate Tesla or having some Tesla envy. They would say, we're going to own the entire stack. And I think in the process, in the intervening years, they found out that that's easier said than done.
And almost failed on multiple occasions.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right. And it was the perseverance of Musk and a number of people around him that kept the company going, and also we made some really big bets, right? Including personal wealth related bets. Now you have GM, just as an example, they're returning $10 billion to shareholders through buybacks. Okay, if you're going to be, these dollars, they have determined, I hope, that these dollars are better to be in the pockets of the shareholders than being invested towards transforming the company. What will that mean for GM, say 5 years from now, 10 years from now? We'll have to see. But these are not easy and cheap changes. And if you look at all the companies, whether it is Apple, whether it is Google, whether it is Amazon, whether it is Microsoft, you want to talk about an older style company, the ones that made the big transformation, they invested heavily. Now, in the problem, so let's take the other side for a minute. The automotive industry is a lower margin industry than information technology, and that definitely impacts decisions. But if the incumbents want to really transform and embrace these new technologies and what comes out of these new technologies, then they'll have to invest. Now, in some cases, I'm going back to your earlier question. In some cases, they will decide that they can do quite a bit on their own and own a bigger percent of the stack. In other cases, even if they start by the ambition to own a big chunk of the big portion of the stack, they will realize that they cannot do it, and that will force them into a partnership in ecosystem. On the other hand, because we work with some tier 1 and tier 2 partners, they are also trying to remain relevant, right? So there is that, again, push and pull that's going to ultimately shape the incumbent industry.
Yeah. Just a quick question to follow on. So when you look across the globe, and particularly in Asia, do you see seeds of or weak signals on completely different models that are completely different owners of that future mobility experience? And I'm thinking, could this emerge as something run by cities or regions or just players that we don't really think of in the context of particularly cars and automotive?
In the second book, I introduced this 3-phase new mobility time frame. Mm-hmm. And which in the new book, I rethought a little bit. It's one of the advantages of 3 years, 2 years, actually 2.5 years between books, and one of the advantages that it has. But I think that Azure, if we set as our goal mobility as a service, which to me is kind of like the third phase of that time frame, then my current thinking, based on that refinement of the framework, is that will be very, very regional. Mm-hmm. I mean, it will maybe even just at the city level. A willingness and an ability to combine modalities in a way that is profitable and convenient and safe, and in a way. But when we talk about earlier phases, I think I don't think we need to be thinking regionally. I think we can be thinking more broadly. But as I said earlier, mobility will evolve differently in the United States than in the European Union, and even within the European Union, Scandinavia may have certain differences from Southern Europe. Mm-hmm. Okay, weather plays a role, temperaments play a role, economic conditions play a role, right? I think the same thing we'll see in Asia. But the point is that, or my point is that, when we talk about this second phase, we will have big enough regions, big enough geographies where the automaker can be saying, okay, I will produce a set of cars with characteristics for this area. And then again, the personalization of that experience, the so-called flagship experience, will be very much influenced by the practices and what's accepted in those large regions.
You kind of touched on this in your response there, but I do want to make sure we don't go too far without hitting on the driving. What do you see as the driving forces behind this continued push? Because as we've talked prior to starting the podcast, it seems like we are in a little bit, at least in America, we're in a little bit of a lull right now with pushing forward with the EV markets. But then also some of the investment conversation that you were talking about earlier is like, this is a big piece to chew off for a lot of automakers right now. So, what are those primary drivers that's moving this forward? And do you see them as continuing with the same momentum and force to help this evolve? Or do you think that tapers off as we move forward? What does that look like?
So first of all, we have to distinguish between the business case, so the fleet operation, and the consumer case. In the business case, look at an example. Amazon orders 100,000 Rivian vans. Why do they do it? Better economics of operating the fleet, lower carbon footprint. Okay, they make sure that they communicate that to their customers. Hey, we're using clean vehicles. Here's our impact to the environment. All of that, and they improve their own economics, as it turns out. Well, now AT&T says we're going to test this kind of vehicles with Rivian's vehicles again. So on the business side, you have these kind of drivers that deal with economics primarily, right, and then environment. On the consumer side, it could be different. It could be the convenience, the safety, the economics of how you move. You need to think about. One of the areas that we don't have as much discussion as I was hoping, talking about societal discussion, is when we talk about clean vehicles, you really cannot say, you cannot only look at the vehicle, you really need to look at how the energy that is powering that vehicle is generated and transmitted and all of that. And we will find in that path, in many places, that is not as clean as we think it is, right?
Yeah.
So all of these issues will play a role, and that's why when I think about this timeline that I referred to earlier, I'm not saying it's 5 years. I'm looking at 2050, 20. Kind of like a longer, a few decades. It's not going to be automatic.
I think the broader point in there, though, is the challenge of any innovation getting adopted. And, your point about Amazon and AT&T is interesting because business buyers are somewhat more rational than consumer buyers, right? You do a spreadsheet analysis and you say, yes, this makes sense. We're going to invest. But I think in any kind of innovation like this, on the consumer side, most of us resist innovation. We talk a good game about, disrupt, blah, blah, but personally, we don't like innovation. It's challenging. You have to try new things and then you feel uncomfortable and nervous and
you have to go really slow for a long time before you can go really fast.
Right. And I think it just takes people a while. And so to go to your question about the kind of cultural forces behind this, I think the COVID pandemic was a real accelerator because, necessity drove people to try these new innovations. And once people tried them, they kind of like them. But in general, the progress towards anything like this it takes a long time, and there has to be a value proposition that is so attractive it pushes people over the edge.
Yeah,
and they'll say, "Okay, I'll give this a shot."
Just to go back a little bit about the flagship experience. I mean, we talk about this personalization. When I first started thinking about the book, one of the things that hit me was the fact that Tesla has 4, soon 5 models: SX, 3Y, and now the Cybertruck.
and that's what I believe over 13 years.
Yeah. Moreover, these 4+1, let's call them, Cybertruck was just introduced, are running on 2 platforms. 2 hardware platforms, like the SX is one skateboard, but even more importantly, on the software side, we were talking about software-defined vehicles, it's one platform.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one of the questions when this thing started unfolding was...
And I just to interrupt you real quick, I'm sorry for the listeners who may be wondering, when you're saying skateboard, you're talking about...
It's essentially the chassis of the electric vehicle, which holds the batteries.
Right.
Okay, but that's holds the motors, the batteries. I mean, that's the basic. But everybody was wondering, will the market, consumers in this case, get the same vehicle, right? We started this conversation today by talking about vehicles are being distinguished by their design. And if you look at what Tesla is saying is that we're going to be producing 20 million vehicles by, maybe the end of the decade. And they're going to have the same thing. I drive around the Bay Area. I was recently in Colorado. Before that, I was on the East Coast. And people appear to be pretty comfortable driving exactly the same car, right? Almost harking back to the Model T years, right?
Yeah.
Because they know that the inside of that car is very, very different.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was recently talking to a friend who owns a Tesla. And he said, I would be driving a Tesla even if it was an ICE vehicle. Why? Because it's an intelligent vehicle. Okay. And it doesn't matter. I said, well, what about the fact that this is a car person, by the way. So what about the fact that the shape, the design of your car is the same one as a million other people have? And who cares? I mean, I'm in my vehicle. I know what I have around me. And that's where, again, the analogy to smartphone or tablets or whatever is relevant because, billions of people carry an iPhone.
Yeah.
They're not bothered by the fact that they have exactly the same piece of hardware in their hands. What is different, though, is that if you look at that iPhone, that I have versus the iPhone that you have, I can guarantee that at least 50% of the applications are going to be different.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's where, again, to me, the flagship experience becomes relevant, which means that's why understanding the customer, forget about how you're going to call it whatever you want. But what is important and what the incumbent automakers are missing today is that intimate understanding of the customer, of the customer's mobility related activities.
And you touch a lot on that as far as one of the big next steps, and we're already doing it to some extent, especially makers like Tesla. But the next big step that automakers are going to have to move as they continue to evolve is that collection of data. And more than just how far are you driving and how fast are you driving, but what you're talking about is big data changes, how much can we capture to personalize the experience to offer you the things that you most likely would like? Maybe you don't even know that you would like them, or that you may not even know that they're there for you to purchase. But that then opens up the opportunity not only for a better car experience, but also more opportunities for companies to monetize, to advertise, to market.
Exactly.
And so do you think that we're seeing some makers do it currently? Again, Tesla is a great example of some of that. Is that something that you think is going to happen on the faster side of this progression, or do you think that's going to be a longer horizon?
So first of all, just to clarify, automakers today, incumbent automakers, collect a lot of data.
Yeah.
They collect data from their connected vehicles. And vehicles on the road today are connected even if they're not software defined. Okay, so we have the category of connected vehicle, which is different than, every software defined vehicle is connected. Not every connected vehicle is software defined. Okay.
Yeah.
So automakers do collect a lot of data. The problem is, number one, I will contend, based on our research, just to work that went towards the book, they're not utilizing even the data that they collect to its fullest. Okay. The second thing is, though, that collecting data from the vehicle's sensors, do I have my windshield wipers on? Do I apply the brake? Those give you part of the picture, but they don't give you the whole picture.
Yeah.
When I stop at a supermarket on my way back from work, at the end of or during my evening commute, and that kind of trip, that kind of stop, shows different intent than when I go for my weekly grocery shopping. Okay, I spend different amount of time in the supermarket. I come out of the supermarket with a much bigger load, which means what? Which means that it is far more important to me to park the vehicle closer to the supermarket building than, say, at the end of the parking lot. But while I'm parking it, I'm also concerned about safety. Is my vehicle going to be dinged? Is my vehicle going to be broken into, right? So these behaviors, understanding the requires connecting customer data with vehicle data, right? That does not happen today.
I think it comes down to a product-centric mindset,
Exactly.
right? The car makers today get all the data from the product. Where does it break? What are the challenges? What needs upgrading? But they don't really get data from the user or the driver or the customer in this case. And that mindset is a lot harder because you got to intrude in people's lives and find alternative data sources and get them to, opt in to share
Exactly
where they are and what they're up to.
And Tim, you brought in an excellent point here. Let me make part of it. With a software-defined vehicle, we have the opportunity to distinguish between user and owner. And this is a very important insight. Because if I'm sharing my car, if I'm making my car available for car sharing, right, for whatever reason, the automaker has the ability to get mobility-related data about more than the owner, right? If I have a car, if I'm a one-car household, but there are 3-4 people in my household who are using that car, that distinction is important to make, and the different mobility patterns of each one of these users are very important to capture, because now I can have, Amazon knows that we have one Prime account in my household, but Amazon knows how I'm shopping versus how my wife shops. Okay. Both from time, the duration that we stay on the website, the items that we buy, the discounts that we utilize, when we buy things, all of that, right? How far in advance of needing something. Automakers don't have that knowledge today. Mm-hmm. And this is all knowledge which is absolutely relevant to the customer experience and absolutely relevant for monetizing portions of it. We're not claiming, the book doesn't claim that 100% of these behaviors will be monetizable. But through the analysis of these behaviors, you will be able to determine which of these are monetizable and when they're monetizable. There are services that can be monetized on a subscription basis because they are useful over a long period of time. And there are services that are transactional because they're only useful once. And that, I mean, okay, I was in Denver, a recommendation for a restaurant to have a business meeting. Well, that's transactional. I mean, it's not that I'm going to be going to Denver on a weekly basis, living in the Bay Area. So that type of both the depth and the type of insight, because they need to start thinking about user as opposed to just owner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that monetization point's interesting. And in your book, you discuss, I think, the gap between the ambition for some of the car makers and the amount of post-sale monetization they're getting today. And I think this is going to be a very interesting challenge, both from a consumer adoption mindset. We're not used to paying too much. Perhaps we pay for connectivity in our car, but the amount of willingness to pay, I think, is relatively low to non-existent. Now, this doesn't make it impossible, right? 30 years ago, none of us paid a cell phone subscription, and now I think the average American household spends $800 a year, or maybe it's $800 per person on connectivity. So we can train people to spend in new ways, but we've also seen some of the early initiatives fail. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on how that may evolve and what the opportunities there are. If you understand your customer fully, if you have that data, what are the ways that you could create value and then monetize that value?
So the first thing I would say there, again, going back to this issue of connected vehicle versus software-defined vehicle. What has happened to date is automakers have offered services around their connected vehicles as essentially a laundry list, but those services were pushed into the market. So you go to the app store or service store of OEM, and you'll see here the 20 things that we offer, 10 things, whatever, some number. By understanding the customer, that changes into a pull as opposed to a push. So now the customer is pulling you and says, I need this, right? You're recommending it. Thank you for recommending it. I need it. And in fact, I claim that some of that personalization will be preferences or items that are stated by the user of the vehicle. I want the temperature when I get into the vehicle to be 22 degrees centigrade, period, end of story, okay? And others will be inferred. You're going to the supermarket for your weekly grocery shopping. Here's what we think you should be doing, and here's what we offer. We found a parking spot for you. And yes, we also want to offer you a sentry service to protect your vehicle. That is the inferred and creates the pool.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other thing that I'm saying in the book is that OEMs need to start stratifying these services. There will be services that are brand specific, brand wide. There will be services that are model wide, and then there will be these personal services, I call them in the book, that would be what the user wants to associate with their account, so that when they get into the vehicle is configured properly. When they move around the vehicle, that movement is reflecting whatever happens, whatever interactions between that mobility partner and the user it's really reflective of that personalization, that understanding, right? What has happened, I think, with OEMs during that push phase, right, of connected vehicle, is that they've said, well, because we're offering these services, we're also going to charge them, as opposed to be thinking, well, wait a minute, I just charged $70,000 or $100,000 to this owner to buy this vehicle. Does it make sense for me to also try to sell them X, Y, Z? It doesn't matter what it is. And I think that's where you saw the backlash. The other, we recently analyzed for one of our automotive supplier customers, several thousand comments that were about the mobile applications and mobile services offered by OEMs. Mm-hmm. So these were collected in the app stores where their mobile applications are offered. In most cases, if you take away the idea of buggy applications or slow response, a lot of it is disappointment that I just paid you this amount of money. I just bought a luxury car and now you're nickel and diming me, as opposed to really understanding what you should be offering and what you shouldn't be offering. And that's why, again, going back, the software-defined vehicle will allow an OEM to offer something more basic and then build it up from there based on the needs.
That relevance, I think, is interesting. So I worked with a number of car makers over the years, and they had some pretty innovative concepts. pushing the boundaries. One was all around health. So you're sitting in this vehicle every day if you're a US commuter this was particularly pre-pandemic, for a certain amount of time, and so we could use the sensors in the car for biomarkers. We can get your pulse from holding the steering wheel. We can understand, from your facial expressions, are you tired, and so on. And that got us ideating into, we could do all these health related things. Then the question is, but what's the permission to play?
Yep.
Does my car maker have that? And we decided no. But the way that this OEM used the data was in the recommendations it made for the route you take. So, for example, if you look clearly stressed and harried, then it's going to take you on in the Bay Area on Highway 280, because it's a beautiful scenic road with plenty of space and mountains and nature to calm you, as opposed to 101, the other option, the road that runs parallel, which is a much tighter road with more vehicles and more stress. So where I'm going with this thought is, I think there's a lot of interesting opportunity for innovation, but it has to be relevant to mobility and the level of kind of trust and permission to play that you have with the person providing the service to you, or the company providing the service.
You're absolutely right. And understanding the context, these are opportunities for both engaging the customer, the user of this vehicle, but also then monetizing at the appropriate opportunity.
We've been doing a lot of talking about the maker. And I think everyone, as you kind of go deeper into this subject matter, one of the questions I had very early on, and you talk about in the book, and I think a lot of people have, is the role that the dealer plays as this evolution continues to make. I was very intrigued by the point that you were making in there, as far as the connection, that the makers need to continue to grow their connection, the strength of that connection with the user, providing more value on a daily basis. Is the software alone going to be enough of a connection there? Do you need the dealer? And if so, what role does the dealer play as we move forward in this transition?
This morning, there was an interesting article in Reuters about an investigation that they did relating to breakdowns of certain breakdowns in Tesla vehicles. And they were talking about, among other things, owners taking the vehicles to service centers and how long it was taking to respond. And I think Tesla in the process got some black eyes from that. So there's no question that there is a role for certain of the services that are provided by the dealers today. The question is under what business model? I mean, today, frankly, again, I'm oversimplifying here. The OEM manufactures the vehicle, sells it to the dealer. For the most part, they kind of like set it and forget it, right? They're interested in pushing out production. They're not, once the vehicle is taken over by the dealer, is delivered, and the dealer says, I want 100 vehicles in December and 100 vehicles in January and 50 vehicles in February, et cetera, and so forth. Once that distribution happens, then it's the dealer's responsibility. And so today we commonly talk about the fact that the dealer has a lot better knowledge about the owner of that or the user of that vehicle than the OEM does. Okay. The other example we're talking about, Tim talked about his experience with a car rental company in Los Angeles. I think car rental companies are missing a huge opportunity to educate consumers about use of this new powertrain, new energy vehicles. And the OEMs, by extension, are also missing that opportunity, part of that opportunity, because they should be partnering a lot closer with Hertz, with Avis, with Budget, to say, well, not only we're going to deliver vehicles to your lot, but Hertz orders 60,000 GM electric vehicles, okay? Not only we're going to do that, but we're also going to help you educate the consumer and provide the experience that makes that consumer say, boy, this is so much different than what I'm used to in my current prior technology, prior generation vehicle, okay? That is not happening. So there is definitely a role for something that, an organization that is close to the consumer, close to the end point. And that's beyond the charging station, okay? Whether the dealer model as that has developed over the past 80, 90 years is the right model for having that intimacy and the OEM becoming the mobility partner of the user, of the vehicle's user, that I think will differ. That the answer to this question will differ from OEM to OEM.
I think there's certainly something in the idea of rental car companies pushing the innovation. So it's shown, perhaps not for business travelers, but when people are on vacation, they tend to be more relaxed and more open to trying new things. So I've had experience of trying to introduce connected home products to people, and putting them in hotels is actually a good way, because people don't have the patience to do it at home. But if they're in a hotel room and there's an iPad and you can play around with the blinds and so on, the thermostat, people have more tolerance to try new foods, try new experiences, and so for leisure travelers, I think that would be a great place to introduce these sorts of vehicles to. Going back to the dealership question, though, it's interesting. I think it will evolve differently by country, and I think that the dynamic is for the car makers to want to have a more direct relationship with their buyers and drivers and users, and the data coming off the vehicle potentially gives them more opportunity to do that. Having said that, the big part of the ownership experience is dealership. And just yesterday, I was on a call with the head of a very large US dealership chain, and he was talking about their attempts to digitalize the customer experience just to increase efficiency. So people can pick up cars after hours and drop them off, and they can make bookings using a mobile app. And, this feeds into the operating system and software for the dealership. And people are very reluctant, it turns out. A lot of people want to actually chat with a person and go, even though it's a very simple, I want my oil changed, or I want, tires rotated or whatever. They still want to have that sort of connection and human connection and confirmation that what I asked was done. And so again, coming back to how hard it is to push innovation, I think it'll take a while, and that the human connection and the placefulness of a dealership will have a role to play for a long time to come, even if the car makers take more responsibility for the personalization and data.
For me, the issue is not whether, as I said, we will have an organization that today is filled by the dealer. The question is whether we will have the dealer as a business entity, or whether that organization will be owned by the OEM.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other ideas that I develop in the book is, as part of this second phase of new mobility, phase that we're in right now, I claim that the OEMs need to start thinking about treating the vehicles they produce, their entire park, as a fleet. And if they operate it as a fleet, which means that they have a much more direct relationship with each vehicle and its users, and manage it in such a way, not unlike how businesses manage their fleets, not only they will be able to learn more about these mobility patterns, but if they so choose, they will be able to provide that value that we've been talking about. What is common to talk about, and obviously the major piece of the book, is the customer journey. And one of the extensions that I make to this concept of customer journey is that I'm saying, in the after sales period, that customer journey is a bunch of small journeys that you need to understand on a daily basis. Okay? I think we covered that quite well. Now I'm also saying, and going back to this issue of the life cycle, the different life cycles of the vehicle, I claim that the software-defined vehicle has what I call in the book the vehicle journey. And I call it the vehicle journey because I'm saying, under an owner and several users who are around this owner, the vehicle is configured in certain ways and it's operated in certain ways. If the OEM starts thinking of their park as a fleet, when that owner wants to get rid of that vehicle, if the OEM has the right relationship and wants to keep that relationship with that owner, then they will take the vehicle, since they're treating it as part of their fleet, and they can reconfigure it and reintroduce it in the market. That reconfiguration, by the way, that vehicle may go through several owners, and as far as the OEM is concerned, can monetize that vehicle several times. Today, that does not happen, by the way, right?
Yeah.
Because the OEM sells it to the dealer. The dealer may be able to monetize it multiple times. But not the OEM. Okay. Under the vehicle journey, the OEM does have the capability to do that. And again, where I talk about AI in the presence of that vehicle journey is that the OEM, based on the data that they are collecting from the individual vehicle, and combining that data with market conditions, market reality at the time that they want to reintroduce that vehicle into the market, they can reconfigure it with that knowledge in a way to make it very attractive to whichever segment they want to attract with that vehicle. Because the segment that they offer that vehicle, the brand new vehicle, may be different than the segment they decide to offer the used vehicle, right?
Yeah.
So this idea of the use of the vehicle journey and what needs to happen during that journey in order for the OEM to monetize that vehicle multiple times is a concept that I do spend, some time in the book. And I think it's one of the two key concepts in the book. Like you have, on the one hand, you have the customer journey that is extended not only in the pre-sales process, but in the post-sales, and becomes a series of individual daily journeys, if you will.
Yeah.
And then parallel to that, you have the vehicle journey, because the vehicle has life beyond the first owner.
Yeah.
Right. And the users around that first owner.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think the flip side of that equation is what can the OEM do with the cumulative knowledge that they have of the driver? And right now, the point where you buy a new car or a replacement car, if you're going to buy a used car, is when people switch brands, right? You go from Toyota to Subaru, or from Audi to Mercedes, or whatever it is. But if the car maker were to come to you, and whether it's new or used, and they'd said, Tim, you've been driving this Toyota for the last 4 years. We have all this knowledge of where you go, what you do, what your needs are, what your preferences are. We will transfer that to your new Toyota vehicle, whether it's brand new or reconfigured. That way there's continuity.
Exactly.
And you've given me a reason to stick with a brand because they know me. So I think if you could combine those two sources of data, it'll be a strong...
chapter 3 of the book, actually, I even tried to provide a graphic of how this timeline can evolve, because understanding it, and yesterday I was talking with a narrator who is doing the audio book, and we were discussing how do you communicate in a narration this entire timeline. So we have some ideas. We'll see whether they pan out. But this is a very important point, right? Because you should not be thinking, as the OEMs do, okay, car came out of the assembly line and went to a specific dealer because they ordered it. They should be thinking that here's a car that has a life over the next, let's say, 15 years. How am I going to monetize that car and the services that are offered around that car?
Well, you can see the potential there to enhance and grow brand loyalty across kind of speaking to what you're saying there. I just think, if I distill it down, just from a level of using my own devices, if all of a sudden I was like, I'm leaving the Apple ecosystem, my world would be flipped upside down for quite some time until I got everything resituated.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. And so you can start to see how that impact only enhances brand loyalty to automakers. And
exactly. It's an issue of, again, concepts that other industries understand very well. Brand loyalty, customer lifetime value.
Yeah.
And what is the value exchange that will allow me to maximize customer lifetime value? I don't think automakers know customer lifetime value at the individual buyer level.
Yeah. And I think that's a great,
that's a beautiful wrap.
That's a great place for us to wrap up. I think one last question I'll pose to each of you as we wrap up our discussion here. But for the folks listening who want to learn more, I mean, we've already mentioned your books, the 3 books again, the Flagship Experience, the Transportation Transformation, and remind me the third one.
Big data opportunity in our driverless future.
Yes. So those are the 3 that you have written, Evangelos, which we would recommend. Outside of those, would either of you have any recommendations if we're wanting to learn more about product or something that's speaking to user journeys or more human-centric design, or more about the specifically on the automotive side? Do we have any thoughts as far as recommendations we may want to point people to?
So on the automotive, I'll have like 3 recommendations. I think Higgins' book called Power Play about Tesla. Higgins is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. He spent a lot of time. This is on Tesla, not on Musk.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's a particularly insightful book. On a more easily consumable base, I will say Mike Doon's newsletter called Zozo Go. Mike used to be an executive at GM. He understands the Chinese and by extension Asian automotive market like no one else, in my opinion. And he writes a very insightful blog slash newsletter.
Okay.
And then on the podcast side, there's a podcast called Autonocast. And it's three individuals who have opinions about new mobility, and they bring interesting guests, and they, even when they banter among themselves, is interesting. These are very opinionated people.
Yeah.
And sometimes get you out of your comfort zone, but I think that's good. You know, after all, we're talking about new mobility. So to me, those would be three.
That's great.
Resources. And there are many blogs and other resources about the automotive industry, specific to one automaker, you know, whatever, into your heart content. But in my mind, if you were to think about kind of book, newsletter, podcast, those would be three that I would.
And the podcast was Autonocast?
Autonocast.
Okay, I'll check that out. If I take your question not specifically to automotive, but more broadly about this type of thinking that we've been discussing is required by the incumbents to change. There's a book called Design-Driven Innovation, and the author is Roberto Verganti. He's an academic in Milan. And this is a great book that gets to the sort of foundational principles of how you approach radical change in value in this way. And, you know, he comes from a design background, but I think anybody working in product and specifically digital product would resonate with the techniques and methodologies he describes, because it takes a type of radical thinking to break out of an industry norm. And so I think that's where the toolkit of design and creativity can really add power to your product ideation.
Great. I think that's a great place to end. So with that, we'll wrap up our conversation. Again, want to thank Tim, Evangelos. Thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with us here today. It's been very insightful for me, and I think our listeners are going to get a lot from it. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. If you would like to know more about how Method can partner with you and your organization, you can find more information at method.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social and be sure to check out our monthly Tech Talks. You can find those on our website. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next time.